My husband won $35 million in the lottery and asked for a divorce. 5 days later, he begged to come back. My name is Margaret Whitfield, and I thought I knew what stability looked like. After 30 years of marriage, after countless mornings spent making coffee while he read the newspaper at the kitchen table, after enduring both the lean years and the comfortable ones, I thought there wasn't a storm left that could shake me. But life has a cruel sense of irony. The night my husband came home waving a lottery ticket, his face flushed and his hands trembling, I thought he was about to give me the surprise of a lifetime. The memory of that night is etched into me like a scar. He burst through the front door, nearly tripping over the rug in his rush. His tie was crooked, his shirt half untucked, and he was holding a piece of paper as though it were a holy relic. "Maggie!" he shouted, his voice almost boyish. "You won't believe it. We've hit it 35 million. I froze, dish towel in hand, staring at him. 35 million? The words didn't even register at first. I had spent the evening folding laundry, worrying about the rising cost of groceries, calculating whether we could help our daughter with her student loans. Suddenly, numbers larger than my imagination were floating in the air like fireworks. He grabbed me by the shoulders, shaking me lightly, his eyes wild. "We're rich, Maggie. Do you understand? Everything we ever dreamed of, we can have it now." I wanted to believe. I wanted to feel the joy he expected of me. For a moment, I even let myself picture it. Traveling to Paris, fixing up the house, never again fearing medical bills or car repairs. My chest swelled with something I hadn't felt in years' hope. But underneath his excitement, I saw something else flicker in his eyes. Not joy, not relief. It was something darker, greed, hunger, a kind of restless calculation, and it made me shiver. That night, I lay awake beside him as he muttered numbers in his sleep. Not numbers of bills or debts, but lists, cars, vacations, investments, yachts. His hand twitched against the sheets, grasping at dreams I wasn't part of. The next morning, I told myself I was being paranoid. Winning such an amount of money would change anyone, it would take time to adjust. Still, I cooked breakfast like always, hoping he would settle into the reality of our fortune with me. Instead, he barely touched his food. He stared out the window, as though the world beyond it was suddenly too small for him. When I asked what he was thinking, he just smiled strangely and said, "About the future." We told our children later that week. They were stunned, overjoyed, and for a brief moment, our family laughed together as though we were untouchable. But even then, I noticed my husband's gaze drifting elsewhere, toward a horizon only he could see. I tried to push the unease aside. Surely, this was a blessing. Surely, after all our years together, he would want to share it with me. What I didn't know then was that the lottery hadn't just made him rich. It had stripped away the thin layer of decency that had covered his ambition all these years. The wind didn't change him. It revealed him. The day everything cracked began innocently enough. I was in the garden, trimming roses, when he came outside. His steps were deliberate, his jaw set in a way that made my stomach tighten. He didn't sit beside me, didn't ask about the flowers as he usually would. "Maggie," he said flatly, "we need to talk." I wiped my hands on my apron, suddenly uneasy. "What is it?" He didn't flinch. He didn't even hesitate. "I want a divorce." Just like that. No preamble. No softening of the blow. My knees nearly buckled under me, and I had to grip the garden bench to keep from collapsing. "What?" The words scraped out of my throat. "What are you talking about?" "I've been thinking about this for a while," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "The truth is, Maggie, I don't want to spend the rest of my life tied down. I've wasted too many years already." My ears roared, as though the world had gone silent except for his cruelty. "Tied down?" I repeated, my voice trembling. 30 years, and now you call it wasted?" He shrugged, his eyes cold. "We're different people. I need freedom. With this money, I can finally live the life I deserve." The words, "the life I deserve," carved into me like a knife. That night, I walked through the house like a ghost, my hand trailing along the walls, the furniture, the photographs. Every corner whispered of the life we had built, the birthdays, the Christmases, the quiet evenings spent together, all of it dismissed in a single breath. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the indentation his body had left in the mattress. My tears blurred the familiar shapes around me. The house felt enormous, empty, as though his departure had sucked the air from every room. I thought of calling my daughter, but shame stopped me. How could I tell her that her father, fresh from a fortune, had decided her mother was disposable? People say money changes everything. I used to think they meant it eased burdens, opened doors, granted peace. But standing there, in the silence of my home, I understood the darker truth. Money doesn't just change, it reveals. And what it revealed in my husband was something monstrous. And me? It revealed that I was suddenly very much alone. By the end of that first night, my chest ached with a question I could not silence. How do you live when the person you trusted most chooses fortune over you? The morning after he told me he wanted a divorce, I moved through the house as if I were underwater. Every sound was muffled, every color dimmed. My body went through motions making coffee, opening the curtains, but my mind was hollow, echoing with his words. I want a divorce. It didn't matter that we had shared 3 decades, raised children, weathered storms both financial and emotional. None of it mattered now. To him, I was not a partner, but a weight to be cut loose the moment he could afford a shinier life. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, scrolling on his phone. He didn't even look ashamed. His face was smooth, smug, like a man who had already stepped into his next life. I stared at him for a long time before whispering, "Was this always your plan? To wait for the money before discarding me?" He looked up, a small smirk curling his lips. "Don't be dramatic, Maggie. We've had a good run. But things change. People change. I just don't want to pretend anymore." Pretend. That word nearly broke me. Pretend? Was that what 30 years of marriage had been to him, a performance until something better came along? That afternoon, he began making calls. I listened from the hallway, as his voice shifted into a slick tone I hadn't heard in years. He was calling lawyers, making inquiries, asking questions about property division. I wanted to storm in and scream, but I couldn't move. My body felt nailed to the floorboards. Later, he came to me with an envelope. "It's better if we do this quickly and cleanly," he said, almost cheerfully. "I'll give you a settlement. Generous. You won't have to worry about bills." I stared at the envelope as though it were poisoned. "So that's what I am to you now? A bill to pay off?" He sighed, as though I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Maggie, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Think about it, you'll have security. You can live comfortably. Isn't that enough?" Enough? My marriage wasn't a transaction. My life wasn't a line item on a ledger. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked from room to room, my hands brushing over framed photographs. Our wedding day, the birth of our son, Christmas mornings, vacations where we smiled into the camera, arms wrapped around each other. Were all those smiles lies? Or had he changed only now, poisoned by sudden wealth? I didn't know which truth hurt more. At one point, I stopped in front of the mirror in the hallway. My reflection startled me. I looked pale, shrunken, a woman already erased. I whispered to myself, "You are still here, Maggie. Don't let him take that from you." The following days blurred into one another. He became a stranger inhabiting my house. He made arrangements to move into a luxury apartment downtown. I heard him humming as he packed, as if he were preparing for an adventure, not abandoning his wife. The worst part wasn't his departure. It was the way he seemed liberated by it. He moved with a spring in his step, his eyes bright with possibility. He was leaving me behind, but he wasn't mourning. He was celebrating. One evening, as he zipped the last suitcase shut, I asked quietly, "Is there someone else?" He paused. For a second, I thought I saw guilt flash across his face. Then he shrugged. Does it matter? This is what I want. It mattered. It mattered more than I could admit. But I said nothing. My silence was the only dignity I had left. The next morning, I woke to find his side of the closet empty. His toothbrush gone. His favorite chair abandoned. He had left before sunrise, without even a goodbye. The house was cavernous without him. I walked through it like a stranger, touching the walls, the furniture, the echoes of laughter that once filled it. Everywhere I looked, I saw absence. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the settlement papers he had left behind. My hand trembled as I lifted them. They were cold, impersonal, a final dismissal of our shared life. I tore them in half, then in quarters, then into shreds. So small they fluttered like confetti onto the floor. No, I whispered to the empty room. I will not be discarded so easily. But the world outside didn't pause for my grief. The whispers began almost immediately. Neighbors offering false sympathy with eyes gleaming with curiosity. Strangers at the grocery store leaning close, lowering their voices. Did you hear? Her husband left her the moment he won the lottery. I became the subject of gossip, a cautionary tale. The woman who lost everything the moment money entered the picture. And still, I carried the unbearable silence of our home. In the days that followed, I began to sense the shape of my husband's new life. Expensive dinners. A young woman clinging to his arm. The kind of parties we used to laugh at when watching television together. It wasn't just that he left me. It was that he replaced me so quickly, so effortlessly, with someone younger, prettier, eager to enjoy the fortune I had no part in. It felt like dying, but slower. I remember standing in our backyard one night, the sky vast above me. My breath came in shallow bursts as I thought about how easily he had erased me. But then something strange happened. Beneath the grief, a spark flickered. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something sharper, something steadier. A promise I whispered into the dark. You will regret this. One day, you will beg for what you've thrown away. And though I had no idea how, I felt in my bones that I was right. When he finally left, the silence in the house was unbearable. It wasn't the gentle quiet of a Sunday afternoon or the stillness after midnight. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of absence. Every tick of the clock, every creak of the floorboards seemed to mock me. I wandered through the rooms like a woman who had been widowed overnight. His closet stood half empty, hangers rattling like bones. The bathroom cabinet was bare, his razor and cologne gone. In the garage, the space where his car usually sat yawned like a missing tooth. But what struck me most was the smell. Our home had always carried his scent aftershave, leather, the faint aroma of tobacco he swore he never used. Within 2 days, even that was fading. As though he had been erased, not just from the house, but from my very senses. I sat in the living room with a cup of tea gone cold in my hands, staring at the front door. Half of me expected him to walk in again, laughing, saying it was all some cruel joke. The other half knew that the man I had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who worshipped money more than vows. The nights were worst. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I reached out more than once to the empty side of the mattress, my hand brushing nothing but cold sheets. I cried into the pillow until my throat burned. One night, around 2 a.m., I got up and pulled down the photo albums from the closet. Page after page of smiles, trips, family gatherings, him holding our newborn, him dancing with me at our anniversary party, him kissing my cheek while our children lit sparklers in the yard. Was all of it false? Or had he simply decided those memories were worth nothing compared to a bank account? I searched the faces in the photographs, looking for signs of the man he had become. I found none. That realization was worse than anger. It was grief for someone who still lived but no longer existed for me. The outside world wasn't kind. At the grocery store, I overheard two women whispering by the produce section. She must be humiliated. 30 years, and he leaves her the moment he's rich. Can you imagine? Poor woman, poor. That word stung. Not because of money, but because of the pity laced in their voices. They looked at me not as Maggie Whitfield, but as a discarded wife, a woman made irrelevant by her husband's sudden wealth. I left the cart half full and walked out before the tears could fall. Even my friends didn't know what to say. One afternoon, Janet from church came over with a casserole. She smiled too brightly, her words coated in syrup. "You'll get through this, Maggie. You're strong. And besides, maybe it's for the best. Who knows what kind of man he's become?" I forced a smile, thanked her, and shut the door as quickly as politeness allowed. Her words were meant as comfort, but they were daggers. For the best? 30 years, erased, and I was supposed to find relief in that. I put the casserole in the fridge and never touched it. By the 5th day, I thought I was beginning to harden. I had stopped crying quite as much. I could walk past the empty closet without clutching my chest. I told myself I had to focus on myself now, rebuild my dignity, brick by brick. But inside, the wound still bled. It was a Tuesday evening when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick it up. His voice crackled through the line, not smooth or smug this time, but panicked. "Maggie," he said, his voice breaking. "I need to see you." I froze, my fingers tightening around the receiver. "Why?" "Please," he begged. "Just let me come by. I made a mistake." My heart pounded in my chest. Part of me wanted to slam the phone down. Another part wanted to hear him grovel, to finally see cracks in his arrogance. Against my better judgment, I whispered, "Fine." When he arrived at the house, he looked nothing like the man who had strutted away days earlier. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. He smelled of sweat and desperation. "Maggie," he said, his voice raw. "I was wrong." I crossed my arms, my back rigid. 5 days, I said coldly. "It took you 5 days to realize you'd thrown away 30 years? He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "You don't understand. She wasn't who I thought she was. The money." His voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. I tilted my head, studying him. For years, I had been the one who bent, who soothed, who forgave. But in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. I didn't speak right away. I let the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating, until he shifted uncomfortably. Finally, I asked, "Did you really believe I would just sit here, waiting for your return? That I would take you back as if nothing happened?" His mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. "Maggie, please. I made a mistake. I was blinded. But you're my wife. We can fix this." I laughed, sharp and bitter. "Fix this? You walked out with your suitcase, your pride, and your greed. You left me here humiliated, treated me like a bill to be settled. And now, because the life you chose has turned sour, you come crawling back?" His face crumpled, but I didn't flinch. For once, I wasn't the one breaking. That night, after he left, after I refused him entry to the home he had abandoned, I stood by the window, staring out into the darkness. My reflection looked back at me, pale, tired, but with a glimmer of something new in my eyes. Strength. I wasn't sure what would come next. But I knew one thing for certain. I was not going to let his betrayal define me. Have you ever been in a situation like this? If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. By the end of the week, the town was buzzing like a hive. News traveled faster than wildfire in a place like ours, and people were all too eager to pick apart the details of my humiliation. At church that Sunday, I could feel their eyes on me. Some darted away when I met their gaze, embarrassed to be caught staring. Others didn't bother hiding their curiosity, whispering behind hymnals. I sat rigid in the pew, my hands clenched around my Bible, forcing myself to breathe evenly. When service ended, Janet, always the first to spread news wrapped in false sympathy, clutched my arm. "Oh, Maggie," she cooed, her lips pursed in mock sorrow. "I heard about everything. Such a tragedy. But maybe it's God's way of leading you to a new path?" Her words were coated in honey, but her eyes glittered with delight. I forced a small smile and excused myself, though inside I wanted to scream. At the grocery store, I could barely finish a simple errand without overhearing my name. By the frozen foods section, two men were muttering, 35 million and he bolts. Can you blame him? Guess she wasn't enough anymore. My chest tightened, but I lifted my chin and walked past them with dignity. They didn't deserve to see me crumble. Outside, the cool air hit my face, and for the first time in days, I realized something important. They weren't laughing at him, they were laughing at me. He had become a spectacle of fortune, and I had been reduced to the pitiful wife left behind. But whispers have a way of revealing more than people intend. As the gossip spread, I began to catch glimpses of his new life. A waitress at the diner mentioned seeing him with a girl who could be his daughter in age. A neighbor's cousin spotted him in a flashy sports car, a blonde giggling in the passenger seat. I pieced the fragments together like shards of glass. He hadn't just left me, he had replaced me. And worse, he paraded it around for all to see. The betrayal burned sharper now. It wasn't just abandonment, it was humiliation. He had traded 30 years of loyalty for the illusion of youth and luxury. One afternoon, while picking up a prescription, I ran into Mrs. Carter, an elderly widow who had always treated me kindly. She shook her head, her wrinkled hand covering mine. "Men like him," she said softly, "never find peace. Money may buy him company, but it won't buy him love." Her words lingered with me as I drove home. They lit a small, steady flame inside me. I had been stumbling through grief, but maybe it was time to stop mourning and start watching. If he believed he had escaped unscathed, he was wrong. Life has a way of balancing the scales. The following days, I kept to myself. I tended the garden, read old novels, took long walks through the quiet streets. Outwardly, I looked like a woman piecing herself back together. Inwardly, I was listening, collecting, waiting, because everywhere I went, someone had a story about him. He wasn't living quietly. He was flaunting the money like a peacock, scattering cash as though it grew from his pockets. And the young woman on his arm was not just a companion, she was a shadow that trailed him, laughing too loudly, clinging too tightly. I wondered if he noticed. I wondered if, in the quiet moments between his extravagant dinners and reckless spending, he heard the faint echo of 30 years, the sound of my voice, the warmth of a home, the steadiness of loyalty. Probably not. Not yet. But cracks were beginning to show. At the bank, a teller confided in me without realizing who I was that the lottery man had been withdrawing alarming amounts of cash. "He looks nervous," she whispered to another clerk. "Like he doesn't trust anyone, not even his own money." I listened silently, my pulse quickening. The empire he thought he had built was already wobbling. One evening, as I watered the roses, I heard the laughter of my neighbors over the fence. Their voices carried clearly in the twilight. "Imagine leaving a good woman like Maggie for some floozy. He'll get what's coming to him, mark my words." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't peace. But it was the faintest taste of justice. Inside, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table. The house was still quiet, still heavy with loss. But it no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a stage, waiting. Because deep down, I knew something my husband didn't. Recklessness always has consequences, and he was too blinded by greed to see the storm gathering around him. That night, as I closed the curtains and prepared for bed, I whispered into the darkness, "You've chosen your path. But one day soon, you'll come crawling back. And I'll be here to decide if you're worth even a glance. And for the first time since he had left, I slept soundly. The whispers about the other woman turned into a steady chorus before long. At first, I only caught fragments her laugh too loud in restaurants, her hair shining like spun gold under the dim lights of a bar. But soon, the pieces began to form a picture. She was young, no older than our son, pretty in a polished, careless way. People described her as magnetic, but there was something brittle in their tone, as though they sensed she was more performance than substance. One afternoon, I stopped by the pharmacy to refill my prescription. The clerk leaned closer as she rang up my order, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Maggie, I saw him last night, at Bella's bistro, with her. She looked, well, let's just say she wasn't shy about hanging all over him. Everyone was watching. Hi. The blood drained from my face. Bella's was where he had taken me on our 25th anniversary. He'd held my hand across the table and told me I was the best decision he'd ever made. Now, the same restaurant was a stage for my replacement. I walked out with the prescription bag clutched to my chest, my legs trembling. The air outside felt heavier, pressing against me, as though the world itself was conspiring to force me to look at what I'd been replaced with. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea that went cold in my hands. I stared at the horizon, wondering what she had that I didn't. Was it her youth? Her laughter? The way she could drape herself on him like an ornament? I thought of the years I had poured into him ironing shirts, holding him through failures, celebrating his small victories. I thought of the children we had raised, the meals I had cooked, the nights I had stayed awake nursing him through illness. All of it, discarded for a younger smile and the lure of new beginnings. But as the bitterness twisted in my chest, another thought cut through the fog. He doesn't love her either. He loved what she represented: youth, freedom, the illusion that money could erase age and regret. She wasn't his partner. She was his fantasy. And fantasies burn bright before they crumble. I didn't have to wait long for proof. At the grocery store, I ran into an old acquaintance who worked at one of the upscale boutiques downtown. She lowered her voice and leaned closer. You wouldn't believe how much she spends, Maggie. Designer clothes, jewelry, handbags. Always with his credit card, of course. He just sits there, looking proud while she piles it on. It's like he's trying to buy her approval. Her words lodged in my chest like splinters. My husband, who once scolded me for buying a new dress because we needed to save, was now bleeding money to impress a woman who saw him as nothing more than a wallet. That night, I allowed myself a bitter smile for the first time. Because deep down, I knew she was hollowing him out from the inside. Days passed, and the gossip grew sharper. Some said she had started talking openly about what she wanted: a new car, a vacation home, a yacht. Others claimed she bragged to friends about how easily she could manipulate him. The image of him smug, confident, waving divorce papers in my face, collided with the new one forming in my mind. A man trapped, his wealth draining away in exchange for shallow affection. And while I still hurt, still lay awake some nights staring at the ceiling, the pain was no longer the same. It was shifting, hardening into something steadier. Because I began to realize I wasn't the pitiful one anymore. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to test the strength of my own composure. I drove downtown, to Bella's Bistro, the very place people had whispered about. My heart pounded as I parked the car, my hands trembling against the steering wheel. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with the low murmur of conversation. And there they were, seated at a corner table, heads close together. He looked older than I remembered. The shine in his eyes had dulled, his posture slouched with exhaustion. She, on the other hand, was radiant, laughing too loudly, her hand flashing with a new diamond bracelet. I stood frozen for a moment, watching from a distance. He didn't notice me. She did, though. Her eyes met mine across the room, and a smirk curled her lips. That smirk told me everything. She knew who I was. And worse, she enjoyed it. I turned and walked out, before tears could betray me. That night, I sat in the dark of my living room, the silence pressing close around me. My chest ached, but it was no longer from grief alone. It was from fury. He had not only abandoned me, he had paraded my replacement, flaunted her in places tied to my happiest memories, and left me to bear the humiliation. But deep inside, beneath the ache and bitterness, a voice whispered steadily, "Wait." Because women like her, and men like him, always collapse under the weight of their own greed. And though I didn't know when, I knew it would happen soon. It was exactly 5 days after he'd left, when I heard the frantic pounding at my front door. At first, I thought it must be a mistake, maybe a delivery, maybe a neighbor in distress, but the pounding grew louder, desperate, almost wild. My stomach tightened as I set down my teacup and went to answer it. When I opened the door, I barely recognized him. His once pressed shirts were now wrinkled and stained, his hair disheveled, his face unshaven. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his hands trembled as they clutched the frame of the doorway. The confident man who had strutted out with his suitcase days ago was gone. In his place stood someone broken. "Maggie," he rasped, his voice cracking. "Please, please let me in." For a long moment, I said nothing. I simply stared at him, my arms crossed over my chest, blocking the doorway with my body. I wanted him to feel that silence, to feel the weight of it pressing down. Finally, I asked coldly, "Why are you here?" He swallowed hard, his eyes darting as though looking for the right words. I I made a mistake. She's not who I thought she was. Maggie, please, I need you." The bitterness that rose in me was sharp and hot. 5 days. That was all it had taken for his fantasy to unravel. 5 days to realize that the freedom he'd traded 30 years of loyalty for was a prison of his own making. I didn't move. 5 days, I repeated slowly, my voice dripping with disbelief. That's how long it took you to decide 30 years wasn't so disposable after all? Ah! He flinched, his shoulders sagging. I wasn't thinking clearly. The money. It got to me. I thought I was finally free. But she used me, Maggie. She drained me. His voice cracked again. And then she left. The image of her smug smirk at Bella's bistro flashed across my mind. I almost pitied him. Almost. But pity is a dangerous indulgence when your wounds are still raw. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let him into the house. He stumbled past me like a man crossing a desert, collapsing into the armchair he had once claimed as his throne. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He stared at the floor, his hands rubbing together nervously. I stood across from him, my arms folded, refusing to soften. Finally, he whispered, "Maggie, I've lost so much already. Please, don't let me lose you too." I laughed, then sharp, bitter, humorless. "You already lost me. The moment you chose greed over vows, you lost me." His head snapped up, his eyes wide, wet. I thought I knew what I wanted. But I was wrong. I see that now. I see that none of it means anything without you. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to shout that his revelation was not born of love, but of desperation. He hadn't come back because he valued me. He'd come back because his fantasy had crumbled, and he needed somewhere safe to crawl. So instead of answering, I let the silence stretch. He squirmed under it, shifting in the chair, his hands fidgeting. Finally, he broke. "She's gone," he said, his voice trembling. "She took the car, the jewelry, thousands in cash. I thought she loved me. But she laughed in my face, Maggie. She called me pathetic." I tilted my head, watching him with a calm I didn't know I possessed. "And now you've come crawling back to the woman you called wasted years?" His mouth opened, then closed. He couldn't answer. The truth was written all over him. Humiliation, regret, fear. The mighty man who had stood in my garden and declared himself free was now shackled by his own arrogance. And as much as part of me wanted to relish it, another part of me, the part that had spent 3 decades smoothing his rough edges, forgiving his faults, felt a flicker of sadness. But sadness doesn't erase betrayal. He tried again, his voice desperate now. Please, Maggie, give me another chance. I'll make it right this time. I'll put you first. I swear it. I shook my head slowly. You can't unburn a bridge once it's ash. His face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought he might weep. He covered his eyes with his hands, his shoulders shaking. I stood watching him, my arms folded, the calmest I'd felt in weeks. For once, I wasn't the one broken. He was. And I realized I had the power, now the power to choose whether to open the door to him again or to keep it closed forever. That night, after he left, after I told him I needed time and sent him away like a beggar, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt suffocating. It felt lighter, as though the weight of his absence had shifted into something else. Because now, I wasn't the discarded wife. I was the one holding the key to his ruin, and I promised myself I wouldn't waste this chance. He returned the next day, unshaven and jittery, as though sleep had abandoned him. I didn't invite him in this time. We stood on the porch, the autumn wind rattling the leaves around us. Maggie, he began, his voice cracking. I have to tell you everything. Please, just hear me out. I folded my arms across my chest. Go on. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously. It all happened so fast. After I left, she wanted everything at once. Dinners, shopping, trips. I thought it was what love looked like, spoiling her, giving her the life I couldn't give you. His words were meant as contrition, but they landed like knives. The life I couldn't give you. He hadn't even realized how cruel that sounded. She said we should invest together, he continued. That she had friends who could help double the money. I was stupid, I signed things I shouldn't have. And now, his voice broke. She's gone. The accounts are drained. I don't even know how much I lost. I stood silent, letting the weight of his confession hang in the air. Part of me wanted to spit at his feet, to scream that I had warned him without ever speaking. But another part of me, cold, watchful, wanted him to squirm longer. So, I said finally, my tone even. You left your wife of 30 years, paraded a stranger around town, and handed her your fortune. And now you've come back to me, empty-handed? His face crumpled. I thought I was smarter than this. I thought I could handle it. But she saw me coming, Maggie. She played me like a fool. I tilted my head. And what does that make me? The fool you thought would still be here when you came crawling back. He flinched as though I'd slapped him. The days that followed were almost surreal. He kept showing up, always at odd hours, always with more desperate apologies. Once, I caught him crying in his car parked outside the house. Another time, he banged on the door until the neighbors came out to watch. It wasn't love that drove him, it was panic. He had burned every bridge but mine, and I was the only one left who knew him before the money warped his soul. One evening, he finally broke completely. He sank to his knees on my porch, clutching my hands as tears streaked down his face. I can't do this alone, Maggie. I thought money would make me invincible, but it destroyed me. Please, help me. Please take me back. His tears should have moved me. 30 years ago. Maybe they would have. But now, I saw them for what they were. The tears of a man who regretted losing comfort, not losing me. Inside, after I closed the door on him once more, I stood at the window watching him retreat down the path. My chest felt heavy, but beneath the ache, there was a strange calm. Because I realized something important. He hadn't just betrayed me, he had exposed himself. To the world. To me. To himself. And no matter how much he begged, that truth couldn't be undone. Later that week, while at the market, I overheard two women whispering near the dairy section. Did you hear? She cleaned him out. Took off with the car and the jewelry. He's been left with almost nothing. The other chuckled. Serves him right. Running off with some young thing after 30 years. Fool thought he was 20 again. I pretended to examine a carton of eggs, but inside, I was smiling. Not from cruelty, though God knows part of me wanted to savor it, but from justice. For once, life had done the work I didn't have to. That evening, he returned again, this time calmer, almost hollow. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands clasped, like a penitent child. I know I don't deserve it, he said softly. But I need you, Maggie. I need us. We built a life together, and I ruined it. Please, please don't let this be the end. I studied him for a long time. His once arrogant eyes were sunken, rimmed with regret. He looked older, smaller, as though the weight of his choices had pressed him into the ground. But I felt no warmth for him, no tenderness, only a cold clarity. You didn't just ruin us, I said finally. You ruined yourself. You chased a fantasy, and now you're asking me to fix what you broke. But I'm not your safety net anymore. His lips trembled, his eyes brimming again. Then what am I supposed to do? I leaned forward, my voice sharp as glass. Live with the choices you made. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. For so long, I had been the one discarded, humiliated, abandoned. But now the tide was turning. The whispers in town weren't about me anymore. They were about him. The mighty man with 35 million had been reduced to a cautionary tale, a fool who traded loyalty for illusion. And though part of me still hurt, still bled from his betrayal, another part felt something like victory, because for once, I wasn't the one begging. And as I drifted into sleep, a single thought lingered. The real power wasn't in the money. It was in surviving without it. The next time he came, I didn't even bother offering him a seat. I stood by the window, arms crossed, while he shifted uneasily in the middle of my living room like an intruder who had forgotten his right to be there. He looked smaller than ever, his posture bent, his voice stripped of its usual confidence. Maggie, he whispered, I can't stop thinking about what I did, about what I threw away. Please, just say you'll give me another chance. I tilted my head, studying him in silence. For 30 years, I had been the one to patch his wounds, to reassure him, to soothe his fears. Now, for the first time, I simply let him flounder. Do you remember, I said slowly, how you told me I was wasted years? That with the money, you finally had the freedom you deserved? He winced, his eyes flickering with shame. I didn't mean it. I was drunk on it. All the win, the attention, her. I wasn't myself. I almost laughed at that. Not yourself? Number. This was who he had always been. The lottery hadn't created his greed. It had only peeled back the mask. I walked past him and sat at the table, leaving him to stand awkwardly in the center of the room. Tell me something, I said, keeping my voice calm, measured. When you left, did you picture me sitting here alone, waiting for you to come back? Did you think I would open the door without hesitation? His mouth opened, but no sound came. I leaned back, watching him squirm. You've mistaken me, all these years. You thought my loyalty meant weakness, but I assure you it doesn't. Arden. The silence stretched, heavy. For once, it was him drowning in it, not me. Over the following days, I noticed a change in the way people looked at me. At the market, at church, even walking down the street, there was less pity and more respect. Word had gotten around. He hadn't just betrayed me, he had humiliated himself. And I, the woman left behind, had not crumbled. Neighbors began to stop by, not with casseroles, but with knowing nods and gentle words. You're stronger than I would have been, Maggie, one woman said. You'll be fine without him, another remarked. Their voices didn't heal me, but they steadied me. They reminded me I wasn't just surviving. I was being watched. And if I had endured the whispers of pity, I could certainly endure the whispers of admiration. He, on the other hand, was unraveling. Each time he appeared, he was more disheveled, more desperate. He pleaded on the porch one night loud enough that the neighbors gathered to watch. His voice cracked, carrying through the street. "She took everything from me, Maggie. Please don't turn your back on me too." I stood in the doorway, calm as stone, while he cried in front of the whole block. People exchanged glances, their pity now directed at him instead of me. And as I closed the door on his sobbing, I felt a strange rush of power. Not cruelty, no. I didn't delight in his pain. But after weeks of being the humiliated one, it was a quiet, calculated relief to see the balance shift. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the garden. The air was cool, the roses faintly fragrant. I thought of the 30 years we had shared, the sacrifices, the compromises, the countless ways I had shaped my life around him. And then I thought of the past 5 days, the ease with which he had discarded me, the swiftness of his betrayal, the shamelessness of his begging once the fantasy dissolved. And for the first time, I realized something vital. I wasn't obligated to forgive. I wasn't obligated to take him back, to heal his wounds, to shoulder his burdens. For once, the decision was mine. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I didn't tell him. Not yet. But as I sat across the polished desk, explaining the situation, I saw the lawyer's brows rise in interest. "With the way he's behaved," she said, "and with how quickly he left after the lottery win, you may be entitled to far more than you think. His actions could play against him in settlement." Her words were like balm to my bruised spirit. For weeks, I had felt powerless, discarded. But here was the truth. His arrogance had already set the stage for his downfall. All I needed to do was step into my role. That evening, when he appeared yet again at my door, I let him in. This time, I offered him tea, watching him clutch the mug with shaking hands. "I know I don't deserve you," he murmured. "But please, Maggie, we can rebuild. We can use what's left and start over." I smiled faintly, though it wasn't warm. "You want me to clean up your mess?" His eyes widened. "No, Yes," I interrupted softly. "That's exactly what you want. But you should know something." But I leaned forward, my gaze steady, unflinching. "I am not your safety net anymore. You chose to burn this bridge. And now, I get to decide whether you'll drown without it." The color drained from his face. I sat back, calm and collected. "For now, I'll let you stew. Come back if you must, but understand. I'll be the one writing the ending to this story, not you." After he left, stumbling into the night, I felt a new strength bloom inside me. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't grief. It was control. And I knew, as I closed the door, that the woman he once dismissed as wasted years was about to become the very woman who determined the rest of his life. The cracks in his composure widened, until one Sunday morning, they finally split open for the whole world to see. I had gone to church as usual, dressed simply, my hair pinned back. I wanted normalcy, just an hour where whispers didn't follow me like shadows. But when I stepped into the sanctuary, I felt it immediately. The hush, the sidelong glances, the quick flickers of pity. Word had already spread. He had been seen around town, weeping, stumbling through his apologies. I sat in my pew, forcing myself to breathe evenly. For a moment, I thought perhaps he wouldn't come. Perhaps he'd spare me this humiliation. I was wrong. Halfway through the sermon, the doors at the back swung open. He staggered in, pale and frantic, his shirt wrinkled, his tie hanging loose around his neck. Gasps rippled through the congregation as he marched straight down the aisle toward me. "Maggie," his voice rang out, shattering the solemn quiet. "Please, please forgive me." Heads turned. The pastor fell silent. My heart pounded as every eye in the sanctuary fixed on us. He dropped to his knees in the middle of the aisle, his hands clasped, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I was a fool," he cried. 30 years, and I threw it away for nothing. Please, Maggie, take me back. I can't live without you. The whispers surged like a tide. I could hear them all around me: shock, judgment, fascination. Some faces were wide-eyed, others smug, still others soft with sympathy. And me? I sat very still, my spine straight, my eyes locked on him. Inside, my stomach churned, but outwardly, I was calm. Because this was not humiliation anymore. This was exposure. He wasn't shaming me. He was shaming himself. I rose slowly, every movement deliberate, and faced him. His tears dripped onto the carpet, his body trembling with desperation. You stood in our garden, I said, my voice steady enough to carry through the pews, and told me I was wasted years. You said you wanted freedom. And now, when your freedom has left you penniless and broken, you come crawling back? His lips quivered, but no words came. The congregation was silent, hanging on every syllable. I leaned down slightly, my eyes boring into his. Tell me, why should I take you back? What do you have left to give me? A strangled sob escaped his throat. I'll change. I'll be better. Please, Maggie. I swear I'll make it right. I straightened, my gaze sweeping the watching faces. Change doesn't come from desperation. It comes from character. And character is something you sold for a taste of youth and greed. A murmur rippled through the church. I could feel the tide shifting, not against me, but against him. He reached for my hand, but I stepped back. His fingers grasped air. Go home, I said coldly. Figure out who you are without $35 million to hide behind. For a moment, he stayed there, kneeling, broken, humiliated under the eyes of our community. Then, slowly, he rose, his face blotched with tears, and stumbled out of the sanctuary. The doors closed behind him with a hollow thud. The silence that followed was heavy. I turned back to my pew and sat down. My heart was hammering, but my face remained composed. The pastor cleared his throat awkwardly, trying to gather the thread of the sermon again, but the morning was already ruined. Afterward, people surrounded me. Some offered words of comfort, others of admiration. You were so strong, Maggie. He had it coming. I don't know how you kept your composure. I smiled faintly, accepting their words, but inside, I was exhausted. My hands trembled once I was finally alone in the car, gripping the steering wheel as though it were the only thing tethering me to the earth. At home that afternoon, I sat by the window with a notebook open in front of me. I wrote down everything: his betrayal, his begging, his public collapse. Each word steadied me, sharpened me. Because I knew the time was coming when I would reveal the truth not just to him, but to everyone. The truth about the woman who drained him. The truth about his arrogance. The truth about how he discarded me like yesterday's news, only to come crawling back when the fantasy fell apart. He thought humiliation ended with his begging. But no. That was only the beginning. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered into the fading light. How do you think they will react when I reveal that to everyone? The morning after his spectacle at church, I woke with an unusual calm. For weeks I had been stumbling between grief, rage, and humiliation, but now a sharp clarity cut through the haze. I brewed my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the small notebook where I had begun documenting everything. The date he left, the settlement papers he tossed at me, the sight of him parading the young woman at Bella's bistro, the desperate knocking at my door, and now, his public begging at church. Every detail was evidence. Evidence of betrayal, of recklessness, of a man unfit to control the fortune he had stumbled into. By the time I finished my coffee, I had made up my mind. It was time to see my lawyer again. Her office was quiet, the kind of place that smelled faintly of leather and polished wood. Miss Carter was efficient, sharp-eyed, and brisk, exactly the kind of woman who didn't waste words. I slid the notebook across her desk. I've written everything down, I said. What he did, what he said, how he's behaved since winning the lottery. She skimmed through the pages, her brows arching higher the further she read. "This is remarkable," she said at last. "You've documented everything. Very smart, Maggie. Will it help?" My voice trembled slightly despite myself. She leaned back, tapping her pen against the desk. "Absolutely. The courts don't look kindly on a man who abandons his wife of 30 years immediately after a sudden windfall. It paints him as opportunistic, selfish. And the fact that he flaunted his mistress, then lost a portion of the winnings to her? It strengthens your case. Judges don't like to see fortune wasted through recklessness." "Oh," I swallowed, my heart hammering. "So what does that mean?" "It means," she said firmly, "you could secure a very large share of what remains, possibly even more than half, depending on how much he's already squandered. His behavior is ammunition in your favor." For the first time in weeks, a genuine smile tugged at my lips, not from joy, but from vindication. He had thought the money made him untouchable. In truth, it had made him vulnerable. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table again, but this time with a glass of wine instead of coffee. I stared at the small stack of legal documents Miss Carter had given me. I thought about the man who had walked out on me, smug with his sudden wealth. The man who had stood in my garden, declaring me wasted years. The man who had knelt in church, weeping before the whole town. And I realized I no longer felt powerless. The next time he appeared at my door, I didn't keep him outside. I let him in. But I kept the lawyer's folder on the table, where he could see it. He noticed immediately, his eyes narrowing. "What's that?" "Plans," I said simply, my voice calm. He licked his lips, nervous. "Maggie, please don't do this. We can work things out. I know I hurt you, but I came back, didn't I? That has to mean something." I tilted my head. "It means you had nowhere else to go." "Lo." His mouth opened, then closed again. I leaned forward, letting my words cut like glass. "You didn't come back because you love me. You came back because you lost her. You lost the money you thought would buy you happiness. And now you're afraid of losing everything else. That isn't love. It's desperation." He sagged in the chair, his face pale. "I made a mistake. Isn't 30 years worth forgiving one mistake?" I almost laughed. One mistake? That wasn't what this was. This was a choice. A deliberate betrayal. 30 years, I said evenly, is exactly why I won't let you get away with it. Because I gave you 3 decades of loyalty, and you gave me 5 days of freedom before you came crawling back. For once, he had no answer. He just sat there, broken, his eyes darting toward the folder again and again. I stood, gathering the papers in my hand. "You should know. I've already spoken to a lawyer. The law will decide what I get now, not you. And believe me, you've handed me enough evidence to bury whatever claim you think you have left." He flinched, his jaw tightening. "You'd really do that to me?" I met his gaze without flinching. You did this to yourself." That night, after he stormed out, I stood in front of the mirror. For weeks, I had seen a woman hollowed out by betrayal. But now I saw something else. A woman who had survived, who had steadied herself, who was quietly holding the reins while her husband spiraled. And I realized something important. The fortune he thought had freed him was about to become the very thing that chained him. He came back the very next evening, but this time, his desperation wore a different mask. He wasn't weeping or frantic. Instead, he carried himself with a brittle calm, as if he had rehearsed a speech. When I opened the door, he gave me a faint smile. "Maggie, can we talk?" I let him in, though I remained standing, arms folded. He sat at the kitchen table, straightening his shirt cuffs, as though trying to restore some of the dignity he'd lost. "I've been thinking," he began, his tone measured. "We don't have to make this ugly. We've shared too much for that. If we put all this behind us, we can rebuild. Together. We can still enjoy the money that's left." I raised an eyebrow. "Enjoy the money that's left?" That's your offer? He winced, but pressed on. You're angry, and I understand that. But anger won't build us a future. Forgiveness will. Think about it, Maggie. 30 years. Don't throw that away for pride. For pride. The word landed like poison in my chest. My pride? He had left me for a younger woman, humiliated me publicly, squandered his fortune like a fool, and now he dared to suggest my pride was the problem? I stepped closer, my voice low but sharp. You call it pride. I call it self-respect. And self-respect is something you only notice when it's gone. His jaw tightened. I'm trying to make amends here. You act like I committed some crime. You did, I said flatly. You betrayed me. You discarded me. You humiliated me. What would you call it, if not a crime? He leaned forward, his voice softening. I was blinded, Maggie. The money. It got to my head. I thought I was invincible, but I see now that none of it matters without you. I almost laughed. Not because his words were funny, but because they were so hollow. He didn't miss me. He missed the comfort of having someone steady when his world fell apart. I sat across from him, folding my hands on the table. Let's be honest, shall we? If she hadn't taken your money, you wouldn't be here. You'd still be with her, living your fantasy, telling yourself I was wasted years. The only reason you came back is because she left you empty-handed. He flinched, his lips trembling. That's not true. It's the only truth, I said coldly. For a moment, his composure cracked. He slammed his fist on the table, his voice rising. Why can't you just forgive me? Why do you have to make this harder than it needs to be? I didn't flinch. Because forgiveness without change is just permission. And I won't give you permission to betray me again. His face reddened, his eyes narrowing. He looked at me as though I were a stranger, someone he couldn't control. And maybe, for the first time, he saw that he never truly had control of me at all. The silence between us grew heavy. Finally, he slumped back in his chair, his shoulders sagging. So what now? You're just going to let the lawyers tear me apart? I met his gaze steadily. Number. I'm going to let your actions tear you apart. I don't have to invent anything. You've done all the work yourself. His head dropped into his hands. For a moment, I almost felt pity but then I remembered the smirk on his face when he first announced the divorce, the casual cruelty of calling me wasted years, and the pity evaporated. After he left, slamming the door behind him, I sat alone in the quiet kitchen. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. For 30 years, he had been the one to dominate conversations, to dictate decisions. Now, he was the one begging, and I was the one who held the power to decide. And I realized something I hadn't fully grasped until that moment. I wasn't fighting to keep him. I was fighting to keep myself. The following days, I continued to meet with my lawyer. Each meeting sharpened my resolve. Miss Carter explained how his reckless spending and public displays of desperation could sway the judge. You're not the abandoned wife anymore, she said firmly. You're the wronged spouse, the one he tried to discard but can't live without. That gives you leverage. Leverage. The word tasted strange on my tongue, but I liked it. That Sunday, I returned to church. Whispers still followed me, but now they carried a different tone. Less pity, more curiosity. People wanted to know what I would do. I sat in the pew, my chin lifted, and let them wonder. That evening, as the sun set and the house glowed with the last traces of daylight, I stood by the window, looking out over the garden. The roses swayed in the breeze, fragile yet resilient. I whispered to myself, he thought he could break me, but all he did was set me free. And for the first time since the lottery ticket had shattered my life, I felt whole again. The day of the settlement hearing arrived like the slow toll of a bell. I dressed carefully that morning, not in anything extravagant, but in something that spoke of dignity. A navy dress, a pearl necklace, shoes polished until they gleamed. I wanted no pity, no whispers about a broken woman. I wanted them to see me as I was, composed, unyielding, and ready. When I entered the courthouse, heads turned. Some were curious, others sympathetic, but I kept my gaze forward. My husband, ex-husband-to-be, was already seated with his lawyer. He looked smaller somehow, his once proud posture diminished, his face lined with worry. The man who had left me with smug confidence was gone. In his place sat someone already beaten. He glanced up as I walked past. For a fleeting second, his eyes pleaded with me, but I did not stop. I simply took my seat beside Miss Carter, who greeted me with a reassuring nod. The proceedings were clinical, a rhythm of papers and voices. His lawyer tried to paint the picture of a man who had been swept up in a moment of weakness, who wanted nothing more than to rebuild his marriage. But Miss Carter was relentless. "Your Honor," she said, her voice firm, "this man abandoned his wife of 30 years, within days of acquiring a sudden fortune. He flaunted another woman in public, recklessly squandered marital assets, and returned only when he had been humiliated and left nearly destitute. My client gave decades of loyalty, support, and partnership. She deserves not only her dignity, but her rightful share of the life they built together." I sat still, my hands folded, but inside my chest, my heart thundered. Each word was a blade cutting through the fog of betrayal. Each word was the voice I had longed to speak, but had lacked the strength to say aloud. His lawyer stammered objections, tried to soften the damage, but the facts were undeniable. His own arrogance had become my strongest weapon. When the judge finally spoke, the room stilled. "In light of the circumstances," she said, "and the evidence presented, it is the court's ruling that Mrs. Whitfield is entitled to a substantial share of the remaining assets. Furthermore, given Mr. Whitfield's reckless spending and breach of marital trust, the division will weigh heavily in her favor." My breath caught. I didn't smile, not yet. But I felt the tremor of victory ripple through me like a quiet tide. Across the room, his face crumpled. He buried it in his hands, shoulders shaking. Afterward, as we walked out of the courthouse, Miss Carter placed a hand on my arm. "You did well, Maggie. Very well. You've secured yourself. You won't have to fear for your future." I nodded, my throat tight with gratitude. For weeks, I had been afraid of being discarded, afraid of being left with nothing but whispers and pity. But now, I knew. I had not only survived, I had won. He was waiting for me outside, slumped against the wall like a man awaiting execution. "Maggie," he said hoarsely, stepping toward me. "Please, can't we talk? Can't we fix this? I know I made mistakes, but we had a life together. Doesn't that mean anything?" I stopped, studying him. His suit was rumpled, his tie askew. His eyes were raw with tears. "Yes," I said softly, "it means everything. And that's why I'll never let you do it to me again." His face twisted, torn between anger and despair. "So that's it? After everything, you'll just walk away?" I lifted my chin. "Number, I'm not walking away. You did that. I'm simply choosing not to follow." And with that, I turned and walked past him, the click of my heels sharp against the pavement. That evening, back in my quiet home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. The garden stretched out before me, bathed in twilight. I thought about all that had been lost 30 years, a marriage, the trust I had once carried like a shield. But I also thought about what I had gained: freedom, dignity, the knowledge that I could survive betrayal and come out stronger. The money would provide comfort, yes. But it wasn't the dollars that mattered, it was the principle, the truth that I had not been erased, that I had not been left with nothing. He had tried to cast me aside, but in the end, it was he who was left broken. As the stars appeared one by one in the night sky, I whispered into the stillness, "You thought fortune would set you free, but all it did was reveal the chains you forged for yourself." And for the first time in months, I felt peace settle over me like a soft blanket. The house was quiet again, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like mine. I walked from room to room slowly, touching the furniture, the framed photographs, the walls that had once echoed with his absence. For weeks, I had wandered through these same rooms like a ghost, haunted by betrayal. But now, something had shifted. The silence wasn't suffocating anymore. It was peaceful. I settled onto the porch with a cup of tea, the cool evening air brushing against my face. The garden stretched before me, roses swaying gently in the breeze. I remembered the day he had told me he wanted a divorce standing right there, his jaw set, his eyes alight with greed. And now? Now those words no longer had power over me. People in town still whispered, of course. They always would. But the whispers had changed. No longer was I the pitiful woman abandoned after 30 years. Now, I was the woman who had faced betrayal and stood tall. The woman who hadn't broken. Neighbors passed me with nods of respect. At church, people leaned close to tell me I'd done the right thing. Even strangers at the market met my eyes, with something more than pity admiration, perhaps. But the truth is, I hadn't done any of it for them. I had done it for me. I thought of him sometimes where he might be, what scraps of his fortune he still clung to. I imagined him alone, replaying his choices like a broken record, wishing he could undo what was already written in stone. Perhaps he thought I would hate him forever. But the truth was stranger. I didn't hate him anymore. Hate takes energy, and he no longer deserved any of mine. What I felt instead was distance, as though he were no longer part of my story at all, but a character who had walked off stage long before the final act. Some nights, I sat by the window with a candle burning low, reflecting on the years behind me. 30 years is not nothing. It is a lifetime, a history, a tapestry of small and large moments woven together. But betrayal had taught me something vital. Years alone are not enough. Loyalty must be met with loyalty. Love must be met with love. And if not, then survival must be met with strength. One evening, my daughter called. Her voice was warm, concerned. "Mom," she said, "I just want you to know how proud I am of you. You didn't let him destroy you. You showed us what it means to fight for dignity." Tears pricked my eyes. For so long, I had felt like a failure, abandoned and humiliated. But hearing her words, I realized I hadn't only saved myself, I had given my children an example. That was worth more than $35 million. Life did not become perfect overnight. Healing never works that way. There were still nights I woke in the dark, remembering his laughter with her, the smirk on her lips at Bella's bistro. There were mornings when the ache of 30 lost years pressed against my ribs like a bruise. But those moments came less often. And when they did, I reminded myself, I had endured. I had walked through the fire and come out with my head held high, and I would never again allow anyone to make me feel small. One afternoon, I stood in the garden trimming roses, the same spot where he had once thrown 30 years away. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and felt the sun on my face. The roses were blooming vivid, defiant, alive. So was I. As twilight fell that evening, I whispered into the quiet. "You begged me to take you back, but the truth is, I took myself back, and that is the only victory I needed." The stars blinked awake one by one, and the world seemed suddenly vast, filled with possibilities. I wasn't rich in the way he thought wealth mattered, but I was wealthy in the ways that count. In dignity, in resilience, in the knowledge that I had survived betrayal without letting it poison me. And that, in the end, was priceless. The story doesn't end with him. It ends with me whole, unbroken, and free. Have you ever stood where I stood, betrayed, humiliated, but still standing? Would you have forgiven? Or would you have done as I did? Comment below, share your own story, and don't forget to subscribe to Grace's Truth, because somewhere out there, another woman needs to know she is not alone.